Hi guys, this is day 7 of the 42-day revision challenge, and today we are covering XED, which is cross elasticity of demand, and YED, which is income elasticity of demand. Let's start with the income elasticity of demand. Income elasticity of demand is basically responsiveness of demand to a change in income. The way we express it in terms of formula is YD is equal to percentage change in our quantity demanded to a percentage change in income. And we say that it's the responsiveness of quantity demanded to a change in income. YD is very useful because it tells us the nature of good for two kinds of goods. So when we look at YD can tell us if the good is normal in nature, normal good, or if the good is what we call inferior good. And let me explain why. When you look at the value of YD, if the value of YD is positive, we say that when the income is going up, the demand is going up. Such a good, we have explained earlier that a rise in income causes the demand for a good to go up. We call that normal good. Similarly, if it's an inferior good, the YD of that good will be negative. And the reason why it will be negative will be because when the income go up, we will see demand to go down. Let's see an example to see how it works. So let's say I have income of 100, and let's say I'm buying let's say 50 units of a good, right? And what if now my income goes to, for example, 120? So my income is going up, and then the quantity as a result of my income going up is, let's say, is 100. So how do we find the YD? Well, we say YD is equal to percentage change in quantity, which is basically 100 minus 50 over 50 over percentage change in price. Percentage change in income, which is 120 minus 100 over 100 times 100. So numerator would be 100 minus 50, which is 50. 50 over 50 makes it 100%, while the denominator would be 120 minus 100 is 20, and if you cancel this, that will be 20%, and that will be 100% over 20% is a value of plus 5. So a plus 5 means that it is positive, means it is a normal good. So when my income go up and I buy more of that good, that means I have what we call this kind of a relationship. So this is my income, right? And let's say on my x-axis I have quantity, on my y-axis I have income. So I have this kind of a relationship. It's a direct relationship. But in terms of demand curve, when I draw a demand curve of showing this, because in a demand curve we show a relationship between quantity and price, this becomes a non-price factor. So my demand curve will shift to the right because my income is rising. So for normal goods, we will see that the YD will be positive, where the demand curve will shift to the right, or as income rises, our quantity will go up from Q1 to, let's say, Q2. Right, but let's look at inferior goods. In the case of inferior goods, we're saying YD is negative. So let's do an example of an inferior good to see. Let's say my income, let me zoom it here. Let's say my income Y0 is 100, and let's say my Y1 is 120, and at the same time Q0 was, let's say, previously 20, but with the rise in income, I'm cutting down quantity, let's say 10. So my YD in this case will be YD is going to be new minus old, so 10 minus 20 over 20 times 100 over 120 minus 100 over 100 times 100. So I'm using the formula new minus old over old times 100, right? So 10 minus 20 is minus 10. Minus 10 over 20 is 50% negative over 20% positive, right? So this is minus 2.5. So minus will mean something like this will happen. That minus means that when my income is going up, this is my income. When my income is going up, I'm buying less of this good. So the quantity basically is higher when my income is lower. So something like this can be drawn. When your income is very high, you buy less of the good. When your income is very low, you have a larger quantity bought. So this is for inferior good. Or, in other words, Y go up, quantity goes down. In terms of a demand curve, it's a non-price factor, right? So when this is my D naught, a rise in income would mean my demand will fall. So if I have price on my y-axis, quantity on my x-axis, the demand will fall as income rises. In terms of examples of normal versus inferior good, we can say this, that your examples of a private school will be what we call a normal good, while an inferior substitute of that would be a public school. Similarly, private transport could be a normal good, inferior good would be a public transport. So when incomes go up, people drive more of their cars, leading to a rise in demand for private transport. But if incomes are going down, people may resort to using public transport, which means rise in demand for an inferior substitute, which is a public transport. So inferior goods demand will fall, and normal goods demand will rise when income rises. This brings us to the next thing, which is that the value of a good also matters to us. So I'm going to make a whole spectrum here again to show you guys. Let's say this is 0, which means everything here is positive, and if your value of your YD is positive, we say that in that case we are looking at a normal good, right? But if the value is negative, we say we're looking at an inferior good. Now, if the good is normal but the value is between 0 and 1, we call this as income inelastic. While if the value is from 0 to minus 1, we call it also income inelastic. So it could be a value like 0.5 could be what we call an income inelastic normal good, or a value of minus 0.5 what we call would be an income inelastic inferior good. So what I'm trying to say here is just that the value of the good matters as well as the sign, because the value of the good will tell us whether the good is responsive to your income changes or not. So for example, if a value is like more than, for example, 1, but if it's positive, we call it income elastic, and if it's below minus 1, which means it's negative, we'll also call it income elastic. So value tells us how responsible. Let's say your YD is for example a positive 0.5. A positive 0.5 will mean that it is A, normal, because the sign is positive, and B, it is income inelastic. which means not so responsive to change in income. So, for example, I can say all our necessities may come under this category, where when my income go up, I may demand more, but not necessarily a lot more, because I'm already buying an amount that fulfills my daily needs. So I may not need to alter my consumption significantly. But if the value is again a minus zero point 0.5, this means it's a normal good. I'm sorry, this means it's an inferior good, which is also income inelastic. Again, this is a kind of a good which comes under a category where we say that your income go up, you demand less of the good and probably go to a better substitute. For example, in rice, we have different qualities of rice, right? So if there is a quality of rice that you're consuming every day, and your income go up, you move to a better substitute, we'll call that as an income inelastic inferior good, because you're not really radically cutting down the quantity of that quality of rice. It's only for a few days that you move to a better quality, which would be the normal substitute. So if income go up, my demand go down, but only by a very small amount, then this means that it is an income inelastic inferior good. Luxury goods, on the other hand, can be categorized as income elastic normal goods. They might have a value of more than one. For example, let's say plus 5 would be something which is what we call, plus would mean normal, and 5 will mean it's income elastic. So if it's an income elastic normal good, this is a good where when my income go up, my demand will go up by much more. And we can say, like demand for vacation could be such, where people, when they have better incomes, they demand more of vacations. On the other hand, when YD is a minus 5, we call it an inferior good, because it's a minus, and it's an income elastic inferior good. It's like a good where you completely switch when your income go up. So income go up, demand will fall by much more. And a good example of this could be any good that will see a fall in demand whenever income rises by much more. Like a really low quality rice will definitely see a significant fall in demand if people's income go up, because people will not want to sort of consume quality which is extremely poor. Let's talk about relevance of YED now. The first relevance of YED is about planning investment. So if an economy is doing really well, let's say incomes are rising, this is a time when people's sort of well-being is high, the welfare is high, people have more incomes. In such times, the demand for normal goods will go up, and especially those which are income elastic. So if I'm a producer who's making luxury cars, I may want to invest more, because now the demand is strong, incomes are rising. It's not only normal goods, but it's an income elastic normal good. But if I'm similarly making an income inelastic normal good, my need for investment may not be that much. Lastly, the demand for inferior goods will also go down in the rising incomes time. For example, if we look at demand for cheap rice or cheap noodles or cheap quality food items, they go down when the incomes are rising. So if I'm a producer of those goods, I may cut down my investment, because I know that there is a significant demand in the future. Similarly, in pricing policy, I think YED can be useful. For example, if incomes are falling, an economy is not doing well, let's say in times of recession, then demand for normal goods will tend to fall. So my normal goods may fall in demand in times when incomes are falling. And if I'm a producer and I really want to sort of arrest the sales of arrest the declining sales or reduce the fall in demand, I may sometimes lower price to make the good more affordable. I can also do this, that I can remove some of the features from my normal good, make it an inferior substitute, and then lower my price to make the good affordable for consumers who are unable to buy in a recession. Sometimes firms may give discounts in those times when they see the sales are not strong, and they want to get rid of the stock that they've bought, because that good might be normal in nature and incomes are falling, so people are not demanding that. So those reduction in prices could be one of the strategies that can be followed. Just like YED shows us the relationship between income and the demand for a good, cross elasticity of demand, or XED shows us the relationship between two goods. So when we look at XED, it is basically, we say XED is percentage change in quantity demanded of good A over percentage change in price of good B. So I'm looking at two goods, good A and good B, and I'm looking at their relationship, and that's what XED is. And therefore we define XED as the responsiveness of demand of one good to a change in the price of another good. So we're looking at two goods here, good A and good B, and we're looking at their relationship. So price of one good changes, and we're looking at demand for another good. And that's why XED is very useful for us in terms of looking at whether the goods are what we call substitutes or complements. When the goods are substitutes to each other, what we say is that in the case of substitutes, our XED will be positive, while in the case of complements, our XED will be negative. Well, positive XED means basically that when the price of, let's say, good A goes up, we know this, that the quantity demanded of A will fall because of the downward sloping demand curve. But because if the price of A is going up, A is becoming expensive, then if there is a good B out there, which is a substitute to good A, for example, let's say Coke versus Pepsi. So when the price of, let's say, Coke goes up, people buy less of Coke, but the demand for Pepsi will go up. So QB will see a rise in demand. So that's why the value of XED positive means that demand is rising to the rise in price of another good, let's say good A. How do I show that in terms of a diagram? So we've done this before in terms of the equilibrium discussion, but let's say if this is demand and supply for example, Coke, and for some reason, let's say Coke becomes expensive. For example, let's say supply curves shift backward and Coke becomes expensive to P1. That may result in basically consumers who switch as they buy less of Coke. So this is market for Coke. They're buying less of Coke. But in the market for Pepsi, we'll see the demand to go up. So demand rises in this case. So just a quick example. Let's say, and let's find out the value in this example. Let's say price for Coke was, for example, 10. Okay, and let's say price goes to P0 versus P1 to 20. So this is Coke for us. But let's say Pepsi, because of this rise in price, quantity previously was, let's say, 100, right? And the people now decide to buy more of Pepsi because Coke is becoming expensive to 150. So how do I show that in terms of the value? My XED value will be 150 minus 100 over 100, that's percentage change in quantity, over percentage change in price of Coke would be 20 minus 10 over 10 times 100. So that will be 50% in the numerator over 20% in the 100% in the denominator, because 20 minus 10 is 10, 10 over 10 is 100, so 100% over this, and the value will be plus 0.5. So this plus means that when your price of Coke is going up from 10 to 20, the demand for Pepsi goes up from 100 to 150, leading to a positive relationship in terms of price of one good to the demand of another good. So that's why XED for substitutes will be positive. Moving on to the complements, we're saying XED is negative. So I can look at an example of milk and tea, and we can say this, for example, that if the price of milk goes up, people will buy less of milk. But if the price of milk goes up, also people who are using milk in their tea will now drink less tea. So the demand for tea will fall. So in a way, we're looking at a negative relationship because price is going up for milk and demand for tea is going down. So how do I show that in terms of numbers? So let's write milk as the good where price is changing, and this is tea where demand is changing. So let's say price was 10 and now becomes 15, and quantity, let's say, was 10 and now becomes 8. So quantity is falling when the price is increasing for milk. So how do I find out our XED? Again, new minus old over old time 100. So 8 minus 10 over 10 times 100, and 10 minus 15 over, 15 minus 10, 15 minus 10 over 10 times 100. So we need to be careful, by the way, of making sure that we always use a new value minus old value. So that's 8 minus 10 is 2. 2 over 10 would mean minus 20%, over denominator would be 50%, so that's minus 0.4. So minus means the value is, the relationship is that of a complement. So whenever XED is negative, we say it's a complement. Whenever XED is positive, we say it's a normal good. The next discussion I want to quickly have is basically what does the value tells us. We know this, that the sign tells us whether it's a substitute versus complement. But what about the value? The value tells us what we call the strength of the relationship. What do we mean by this? For example, if I tell you this, that XED is a positive 0.5 versus XED is positive 5. 0.5 means it's not a strong relationship, which means it's because it's positive, I'll say it's a weak substitute. On the other hand, if I have a value of XED of plus 5, I'm going to call it as a strong substitute. So the higher the value of XED, the stronger the relationship. The lower the value, the weaker the relationship. For example, one could argue this, that Coke and Pepsi can be strong substitutes. So this is Coke versus Pepsi. While, like weak substitute could be Coke versus, like any apple juice company or orange juice company. So although they are competition to each other, but the relationship is kind of a little weak relationship. On the other hand, like if I have an XED of a minus 0.5, I'm going to call it a weak complement. While XED is
a minus y would mean it's a strong complement. So for people, for example, they can say this, that like if you look at US or other countries which were not colonized, milk and tea do not go together. Like Chinese, for example, do not like tea, do not like milk in their tea. So for them, milk and tea are weak complements. But if you look at Pakistan, or if you look at UK or any colonized country, colonized by the British, basically, they have a strong culture of having milk and tea together. So that's why a minus 5 would be milk and tea relationship in countries which like milk with tea, while a weak complement would be milk and tea in countries like China, where people don't consume milk and tea together.
There are two relevance of XED that we want to discuss. The first one is what we call the pricing policy. We know this: the higher the XED, the greater the firms will be related to each other. For example, if the XED is a very high value and it's positive, we say the goods are substitutes to each other. So when the price of, let's say, one good goes down, for example, let's say Coke decides to lower its price, Pepsi has to do something similar, because they are closely related to each other. So the pricing policy, pricing decisions will be interrelated, and that basically affects both the firms. Similarly, if two goods are complements to each other, and let's say price of one good goes up, then the complement knows that demand for that good will go down, because when the price of, let's say, tea goes up and quantity of tea demanded goes down, then demand for milk will also go down, because people who drink tea with milk will see their sales to get affected. So the pricing policy depends a lot on XED, because you want to see the goods which are related to you to see how your demand get affected. Similarly, for marketing strategy, there is a role that XED plays. For example, if I have a close rival in terms of the product, then as a firm, I will want to make sure that if my close rival does any marketing scheme, any marketing sort of expenditure, I would like to match that too, so that I don't lose the market share. So when firms are interrelated to each other, the XED seems to be really high, and the marketing strategy will be such that if one firm does one marketing expenditure, the other firm will like to also follow suit, do the same.